Welcome to episode number 7 of the No Filter Weekly. Shay, 7 episodes in, that's usually when podcasts start to fade away. So I guess I won't be seeing you next week.
Yeah, no, I'll probably take a break next week, and we'll see how we go. But I'm actually pretty impressed. We've got up to 7 episodes. It's not. I'm sure you have the stats, but I'm pretty sure a lot of these podcasts or shows have a couple of episodes, and then people just give up because they're not seeing any outcome or the drive's not there. So the fact we're up to 7, I think we deserve a little round of applause for ourselves.
We do indeed. Well, I've given myself a virtual and physical pat on the back. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a phenomena called pod fading, where people think if they start a podcast, they'll immediately have this huge audience and then they'll be able to monetize it. And obviously us here at No Filter Media, building a media company, we know all about that and the fact that it is a very long game. And so that's why you have so many people either starting businesses, starting podcasts, embarking upon all sorts of difficult pursuits, but giving up way before there's any sort of chance that they'll start to monetize it.
Well, it's probably like it is like that with everything in life, right? You know, you want to lose weight or whatever, right? You might try for 1 or 2 days and realize you don't lose any weight and just give up and grab that bag of chips. So yeah, it's applicable to every part of life.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes of all time from Calvin Coolidge, former US president, who said that nothing in the world will take the place of persistence. Talent will not, education will not, genius will not. The world is full of talented people who amounted to nothing. Persistence alone is omnipotent. And I think you see this show up. So many like high performers, athletes, entrepreneurs, like you name it. They all say, look, it was just about not giving up and just persisting.
Yeah. Well, that's it. So you always hear the stories of the ones that succeed and not the stories of the ones that don't, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah. Survivorship bias, right?
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, it's true, man. And it's something that can lead people down the garden path because they'll hear successful people talk about, I did step 1, step 2, step 3, and that's why I'm successful. But for every one person that followed those steps, there's probably 100 who did the same thing, who just weren't successful.
Yeah, no one ever hears about them. Yeah, that's it. Probably a good thing we don't hear from them. No one wants to hear those stories anyway.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, on the flip side of survivorship bias, we have a country that didn't quite survive, and that being Yugoslavia. So I use that as a bit of a segue there. Not a very good one, segue. Not a very fluid one, but nonetheless, it was somewhat of a segue. So Yugoslavia, of course, my parents came from the Republic of Macedonia, which was one of the 6 republics in Yugoslavia, the others being Croatia, Serbia, Bosnia, Montenegro and Slovenia, although Montenegro, I believe, was part of Serbia back then, but nonetheless, gray area right now. So on a recent episode of the Alley Oop Show, one of our podcasts featuring Leonard Copeland and Andrew Gaze, of course, there was a bit of banter around Yugoslavia because nowadays the NBA is full of players from Slovenia, Croatia, and Serbia who are top players like Luka Doncic and various others. And there was a debate as to whether or not a reformed Yugoslavia would actually be able to go toe-to-toe with the might of Team USA. Where do you fall on this particular question, Shay?
Yeah, it was all kind of brought on. I think one of the because obviously all these NBA players are in the bubble right now, or a lot of them were. A few of them probably left now because they haven't made the playoffs. But there was a photo of all the a few of the players catching up from that region, and there was a good like 8 or 9 people on a table having dinner, and yeah, there's a few stars in there in terms of the team. There's Luka Doncic, I think Nikola Jokic, who's another top player, and quite a few others. I think that obviously have a fantastic, epic team, but I would always give the edge to the US team just due to sheer talent and depth as well. They'd have a decent bench, the Yugoslavian team, if it did exist, but I'm pretty sure the US bench would be a bit deeper. So then it'll probably come down to the argument which a lot of people have is, do you want a champion team or a team of champions? But yeah, it would be awesome to have USA match up against this hypothetical Yugoslavian team. It'll never happen, or you never know, right? But
you never know.
It's it's something where I'd still give the edge to the US team. What about yourself? You got a bit of bias?
Look, I've got a bit of bias, so naturally I'm going to side with the hypothetical former Yugoslavia team. And that's not based on any sort of deep knowledge of basketball at all. That's purely based on the fact that ego can play a big part, and the Americans have been known in a number of past tournaments to underestimate their opponents, and that's usually when they found themselves on the side of the defeated party, similar to any sport, any endeavor. Like when you underestimate what's required, you ultimately lose out. And, you know, I remember seeing George St. Pierre speak in Melbourne a couple of years ago, and we had him on the Future Squared podcast, you can say, because I got up and asked him a question, but it was all about what I learned from that was how he underestimated Matt Serra and eventually, and basically lost his UFC championship belt to a much less fancied fighter because he underestimated him. He didn't train the way he normally would for a big fight. And since then, he's learned to treat absolutely every fighter the same way. So ego can play a part. But also, if you look back to, say, the early 90s when Yugoslavia was united effectively, it was a really strong basketball team. They were also a really strong soccer team. Like their 91 team was, I think they made it to the quarterfinals of the European Cup. I know Red Star Belgrade, and I've kind of gone off into a tangent now talking about soccer, but Red Star Belgrade won the European Champions League back in 91. And it's just testament to their ability to play, like you say, as a champion team rather than a team of champions. And that is always a worthwhile adversary. And you know, someone like Leonard Copeland will argue that the players aren't as athletic, aren't as powerful as someone like a Giannis, who obviously is plays for Greece, so that's beside the point. But nonetheless, his argument was that you can't have 5 unathletic players on the court. But ultimately, what's more important, brute force or skill? Not to say that the Americans don't have skill; they have both. But it's not just about that athleticism.
Actually, I think if it was, obviously, whether it's the Olympics or I think it's these other basketball tournaments where the countries play against each other, the thing that might give Yugoslavia a better chance is it's not like they play best of 7 game series, right? Yep. It's literally like you go through quarterfinals, finals, and you have to win once to beat that team and knock them out, right? After the group stage. So that gives them probably a better chance because usually when you look at the NBA with the playoffs, the fact that it's a best of 7 games across each of the series across a playoff, tournament. It usually means the best team generally wins, because you might have a down game, right? And then you'll make it up in the next game or and so forth. And within 7 games, usually the best team wins. And that's why I'm pretty sure it's in the NBA. It'll be interesting to see actually how many really surprising upsets there've been in terms of championship teams at the end of a season. I think it happened with the lockout season. I think San Antonio won when there was only 50 games in a season. I think this year, given COVID's going on, it's probably the best time for an underdog to come out and win the NBA championship. So to kind of go back to my point, I think Yugoslavia would have a very good chance just because when they are facing the US, it's literally like you win. If you lose, you're out of those kind of tournaments.
Yeah.
Once.
Yeah. And I've just actually brought up some of the past results. So we're going back into the archives here. But
here we go.
1988 Summer Olympics. Basketball, first place was actually the Soviet Union, followed by Yugoslavia in second place and United States in third place. Now, this was prior to NBA players being allowed to participate. So that's probably
that's probably not a good
no surprise, right? FIBA voted to a rule change in 1989 that lifted that restriction. And then, of course, came the Dream Team in 1992, which was perhaps one of the most formidable lineups ever put together on any type of sporting pitch, court, you name it. And they took out the gold medal with Croatia, one of the Yugoslav republics who had just won its independence, finishing second. Now, it was a distant second. I think they lost by something like 30 points in that game. But who knows, with the aid of their fellow Slovenians, or not fellow, but with the aid of the Slovenians, the Serbians, and everyone else, potentially could have closed the gap a little bit more. But it's a hypothetical. We will never know.
We'll never know.
So I suppose to move on from basketball and these hypothetical questions to perhaps another hypothetical question. I've actually just penned this article, as I'm sure you are like me. A little bit, yeah, discouraged by the recent announcements that our lockdown has been extended by another 2 weeks. But beside the point, whether or not the lockdown should be or shouldn't be extended, one thing that struck me about Daniel Andrews, the Premier, and his press conference was claiming that he's got all this data, this modeling has been performed by the University of Melbourne and the University of New England, and that, I quote, "You can't argue with this type of data. You can't argue with science." Now, I don't know about you, but I know that science can be fudged in so many different ways to give you a particular sort of, to basically support your position. And this is actually inspired by a recent book that I picked up, which I recommend everyone picks up. It's called Calling Bullshit, The Art of Skepticism in a Data-Driven World by Carl Bergstrom and Jevon West, who are professors in evolutionary biology as well as data science at the University of Washington. So it's essentially all about how to call bullshit, how to identify bullshit, and so on. So, I mean, in your travels, Shay, how have you come across people trying to use data and whatnot to use bullshit? Or have you yourself come across data which you thought didn't quite make sense? And if so, what was it and why did it not make sense?
I don't have anything specific, but just touching on what you've said, given the world we're in now where anyone can have an opinion and they can share that opinion online, what I find a lot of is friends coming to me saying, "Hey, I read this blog and they told me that if you do this, it's going to heal this part of your body."
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's one random person who is just someone sitting at their computer that probably has just read one thing and thinks that's going to solve all the troubles that they're focusing on. So I think it's important to have as much data and information as possible and not be focused on one opinion or one thought or one thing. I think it's a matter of getting many different views and thoughts across different modes. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway or the thing for me, especially, like I said, given the fact that everyone has an opinion, everyone has a thought, everyone wants to push their thought and focus on the data and the information that supports their cause. And I think that's something that's becoming more and more prevalent in the day we live in and the age we live in.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I just think it's worthwhile just calling out to anyone that's listening that just because something is deemed science doesn't mean it's right. I mean, science is essentially about falsifying assumptions, not proving beyond any irrefutable argument that what you're saying is true. And that you can argue with science. Now, I, for one, am a massive advocate of science because I wouldn't be talking to you right now through this box. If it wasn't for science, I wouldn't have running clean water 2 meters from me. I wouldn't have lights and electricity, and I wouldn't
Love
have.
How you call your laptop a box, yeah?
A box. And I wouldn't enjoy an average lifespan, hopefully, of 70, 75 years. I mean, going back to 1900, the average lifespan was 35. So thanks to advancements in medicine, like we're living incredibly, twice as long, essentially, living much longer lives. But at the same time, it's important to note that just because someone says science says so doesn't mean it's not subject to deceit or error. Now, one example I could think of here. So I've got 7 examples of how science can lead us down the garden path, one being garbage in, garbage out. Like if you're using rubbish data, then your results are going to be rubbish. There's confirmation bias, there's cherry picking and looking at results that support your argument, ignoring all the others. But a really interesting one that I came across, and you'd like this one because you're a Seinfeld fan, is on predatory journals. So, in the scientific world, you have journals who publish articles on, say, medicine. You've got journals on psychology, journals on law, all sorts of stuff. Now, like anything, you've got top tier journals and then you've got really trashy journals. Now with these lower tier journals, they essentially operate on these business models where you pay to play. So if you're a scientist, you want to get your citations, you want to be published, you'll pay them $800 and they'll publish you regardless of what's in your journal, right?
Yeah.
So there's a guy called John McCool, and he's not even a scientist, but he's a Seinfeld fan. And you know that episode where Jerry Seinfeld was walking around a car park trying to find his car with the gang and they couldn't find the car?
Yeah, of course.
Yep.
Classic episode.
Classic episode. And what he do, he eventually urinates in a corner somewhere because he has to go, man. Like, but he gets busted and he gets arrested. And then he pleads that, look, man, I had to relieve myself. Otherwise, I would die of uromycetitis poisoning. Now, there's no such thing as uromycetitis poisoning. Jerry Seinfeld made this up. But this guy, John McCool, actually created a journal which more or less took this sequence of events and put it into an article, and it was entitled Uromycetitis Poisoning Results in Lower Urinary Tract Infection and Acute Renal Failure. Now, guess what? This journal accepted his submission, which was complete baloney, providing he paid the $799 fee, which he did not. So
that's crazy.
It's just
But that's the thing, right? That, like, it's the same with these people that have opinions, write blogs, share things on social media. These things get eyeballs. People see these things and then their opinion forms based on that, whether it be someone who's, say, an anti-vaxxer on social media, post something and their following will be like, yeah, I reckon you're right because I like you and whatever you're saying is probably something I should be feeling or thinking as well. And then that kind of snowballs from there. So I think the fact that, especially when it comes to a journal, where people look at journals as something that has been researched, that is accurate, and these are the things that come to mind for me anyway. If people are reading it, if that example there, that's just crazy. The fact that people could be reading that and thinking that it's real.
Yeah, and there's numerous things like peer reviews as well. Oftentimes, the people reviewing them make mistakes. They can't check every aspect. They can't rerun the whole experiment, and oftentimes it's just a popularity contest, kind of like Amazon reviews and whatnot. Let's recommend our mate's restaurant and give it a good review. But what you said earlier about not looking at single sources, and that's what a great researcher and scientist does. Like, rather than looking at one study, do 20 different studies, do 50 different studies, come to the same or similar conclusion. That's going to tell you a lot more than one isolated study or one isolated person, even worse, saying something on the internet. Like you said, bullshit travels fast on the internet.
That's it, right? But if we bring it back to Dan Andrews, man, the guys, it's a fucking tough position to be in.
Before hold that thought. Let's just hear from Dan Andrews.
All right, let's hear it.
More than 1,000 different scenarios have been put into this supercomputer. We're very grateful for the assistance of the University of Melbourne and the University of New England. You can't argue with this sort of data. You can't argue.
Oh. My internet connection.
Argue with science.
There we go. There you go. I just wanted to throw that one in there. But so Dan Andrews, between a rock and a hard place, I think you were going to say.
Yeah, well, no, like honestly, like he's damned if he does, he's damned if he. Like he's just. I don't think he can win right now. Like either way, people are going to hate him, what he's doing and how he's approached things. And he's kind of sticking the course. It's one of those things, when you kind of have an opinion and then you just kind of, rather than maybe taking a step back and say, maybe we've done this wrong, let's go back and reassess things. You just keep arguing your opinion and just kind of keep pushing that along. It sounds like that's what he's doing. And no one wants to be proven wrong, especially in that kind of position. But I'm not saying what Victoria's doing is wrong. And I think, no matter what he does, there'll be people that argue for and against it. But he's in a challenging position now. And he doesn't apparently, like, I can't imagine this guy getting much sleep, like with this on his mind. There was, it's funny though, there was that, obviously he made the announcement on the weekend and they had a roadmap that had like different steps that we need to take to get to, life as per prior to COVID. And it was one of those diagrams where I could just tell they'd spent thousands and thousands of dollars on a management consultant, say like, I'm not saying it's McKinsey, but like a McKinsey to come in and put together this this diagram with a couple of icons and, you know, some fancy wording and so they could share something presentable to the Australian public. But even with that plan as well, what I kind of worry about is he's saying this is what's going to happen. So on October 1st or whatever the dates are, this is when we'll go from stage 4 to stage 3 and so forth. But he's kind of setting expectations now where people are looking at those dates as this is when things are going to change and get better. Mm-hmm. But there's a big overarching kind of cloud over that where those things can't happen unless a certain number of cases is hit. I think it's an average across 14 days.
It's a average of less than 5 cases over 4, which is almost impossible.
Crazy to think of, but that's the thing, right? He's setting himself up for an even bigger world of pain, because if we don't hit that, which to be honest, like you said, it seems impossible right now, we're not going to be able to do what that plan says. And he's going to have to go back to the public and say, hey, listen, you know, I told you can go out and live your life a little bit more normal on October 23, or I can't remember what the date was. We're going to have to change that and increase lockdown by another month. People aren't going to, there's going to be uproar. Even like right now, there's Melburnians doing protests and stuff. And I don't know, man, it's become a bit of a crazy time.
Yeah, I think setting the right expectations goes a long way, rather than kind of using this disingenuous sort of language that kind of suggests that we might be let out, so to speak, in a few weeks' time, but not really. And then the 14-day rolling average is like I said, almost impossible when you look at what's happening in other states. And I think David Koch actually went head-to-head with Jenny Mikakos, the health minister, and he basically said, look at New South Wales. Like, they've got 15 to 20 cases a day, but their economy is open. Like, people are getting back to work. And most of the deaths and case numbers are associated with the elderly, people in aged care. So why not, isolate your efforts to that particular sector and let everyone else get on with their lives? And like you said, it could be a matter of the backfire effect. The Labor Party's taken a particular position, and rather than looking for what's best for everyone, which I'm sure they're obviously doing to some degree, it's also easy to start identifying with that position at the expense of everything else, especially once everyone's kind of on your back. You really start to identify with that position. And even if the data goes against what you think, you're going to keep pushing for that, because ultimately I think it was called the sophists. There was a school of philosophers who would argue to be right rather than argue for what's right, to learn what's right. So it's a sticky place.
I don't know, man. I feel like there's hopefully things go to plan and we get out of where we're at now. But if we don't, let's just say Mr. Andrews is in a bigger world of pain than he is in right now.
Well, let's hop, skip, and jump. We've gone from basketball to politics and science. Back to sport now with tennis. Novak Djokovic disqualified from the US Open.
I saw this.
The judge hitting. What do you make of this? Because to me, it didn't seem like it was like that hard or intentional. He was just like flicking the ball into the direction of the official.
Man. I think it's because it's a bit of misfortune for him. The fact that I think it hit her in the throat. Yeah. And she literally went down like she was shot. And I think that obviously added to it a little bit. And he got disqualified from the tournament, which is like that's a massive penalty for anyone, especially someone who is like him and probably would have won if he stayed in or come close to it anyway. But the crazy thing is that they found out, I think a lot of his supporters and the public's found out who that lady was, like the Lions person. And now she's getting full-on abused through social media, like people giving her death threats. And so it's pretty nuts. Like, man, people are ruthless. Wow. They just apparently I was reading somewhere that her son or someone in her family, died 10 years ago or something. And she posted just a tribute to her. I think it was her son, a tribute to her son last year on social media. And people are commenting on that photo saying, you're next. And it's just like, people are just crazy. They're full on intense, over something like this, which is obviously it's not her fault. And I think Novak's come out saying, you know, it's not her fault. Stop blaming her and saying these bad things about her and, you know, abusing her online. But man, to put it simply, yeah, people are ruthless these days, especially with social media and trolls. What do they call them? Computer warriors? Or keyboard warriors. Yeah.
Computer warriors.
I think keyboard warriors. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Well, it brought to an end his 26-0 win streak with which he started the year. That's an insane win streak.
So he probably would have won, right? He would have. He probably would have won the tournaments. He's had a really interesting year though, because this whole COVID things hasn't been good for his image either. Didn't he throw this massive party or something?
Yeah,
and
he's he's an anti-vaxxer. He has all sorts of theories that perhaps what we were talking about earlier, there aren't enough studies to validate or to really back. You know, he's an anti-vaxxer as well. And yeah, he organized an exhibition tournament that effectively spread the coronavirus to several people, including himself. And he also came under fire for his quote unquote diversionary move to form a potential breakaway players tournament away from the, I believe it's called the TPA, the Global Tennis Association, whatever the acronym is. But yeah, on this particular incident, he basically said, look, I need to go back within and work on my disappointment and turn this into a lesson for my growth and evolution as a player and human being. So a bit of a throwaway comment there from Djoko. But yeah, an interesting year for him, no doubt.
Yeah, it's is he still number one? I'm pretty sure he probably is, right? I'm sure he is. I'm sure he's at least.
We can
or one or two, but
well, it's one of three, right? Nadal.
Well, there hasn't been. Yeah, well, exactly right. Is it still like? I'm guessing the top three is still probably like what him, Federer, and who's the third one? And Nadal. Are they still in the top three?
Well, Novak's number one, Nadal's number two, Dominic Thiem number three, Roger
Federer's four. There you go.
Number four.
Man, Federer's like what a machine, man. That guy's been going for so many years and he's still in the top three.
He's 39 years old as well, so he's a good 5 years older than anyone else in the top five. Nadal's 34, Novak's 33, and then you look at the rest of the top 10. It's rounded out by people in their early 20s, like Alexander Zverev, Matteo Berrettini, Stefanos Tsitsipas, and Danil Medvedev. I picked the worst names to have to pronounce, man. Like I got like Russians, Greeks, everything in here.
It would be a terrible time. Like the last 10 years or so would be a terrible time to be an up-and-coming tennis player and be really talented, right? But these three guys are just on another level. So it's kind of like you might be super talented, but you're never going to go anywhere near them. But if you grew up in a different era and you came through in a different era, who knows what some of these younger players could have done in their careers. But Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, they've just kind of dominated the scene for the last 10 years, I'd say, right? 10 years.
Yeah, well, probably longer than that now, man. And Federer's racked up
for sure, yeah,
20 Grand Slam titles over his career and earned $129.9 million in prize money. So he has done pretty well.
You've got to remember the sponsorship money as well.
That's a whole different story.
Fortune from that.
He'd probably make more from the endorsements than he would from the prize money.
I think I've seen him on like coffee ads and things here and there. He's probably just making absolute time off that.
Espresso, marketing watches and all that sort of stuff. Armani suits. But then it's also what he does with that money, right? Like you need money to make money. If he's invested it wisely, which strikes me like the kind of person that would have, he'll make tons more in property and stocks and everything else that he chooses to invest his money in. So doing well. But it's one of those things where tennis, you really need to be in the top 0.00001% of players in the world to make a living doing it. It's so many kids out there, and it's like any pursuit, whether it's like music, comedy, sport, like where you have so many people vying for the top. It is kind of different to say wanting to become an accountant, where you could be an average accountant, you could earn $100K a year, but you're not going to make $100K a year playing tennis unless you are on the tour. And to be on the tour, you need to be like in the top few hundred in the world, which still is difficult to get to.
Yeah, it's probably heaps of those people who are talented but aren't at that top level, and they just kind of have a 10, 15-year career and just might play Grand Slams but be out first round, but that's just their life where they just can't get past that first round of a Grand Slam. But even to get to that point is probably it's obviously a huge achievement, but that's your career, is just kind of playing in these tournaments but just going out straight away, and it must be super tough for those people competing against that next level above.
Just
what
qualifying.
their mindset's like as well, right? How they deal with that.
I don't know. You've got to play the long game. Like we were saying earlier, persistence is the key. But at the same time, if you've got 200 other people also as persistent as you are, and there's only 20 to 30 spots at the top of the rankings where you make real money, well, at that point, it comes down to talent and who's a better player.
Yeah,
and,
that's it.
There's that effectively plays out on the court. So moving on from tennis to your favorite musical genre, hip hop. Public Enemy, my admittedly favorite hip hop act, and that's mostly because I'm nostalgic. And when I first listened to hip hop, I was about 9-10 years old, and my older cousins got me into groups like Run DMC, Public Enemy, and NWA. So they've re-released. Exactly. Although it's funny because I was reading the other day, Ice Cube seems to have played a cop in pretty much every movie he's been in. Same as Ice-T. And,
that's good. I like it.
He was questioned about it. He said, "Look, I'm against abusive cops, crooked cops, cops that do their jobs. I support, and I've got nothing against." So that was how he kind of weaseled his way out of that question.
Plus, I'm sure he's making a lot of money from portraying these cops in the movies that he's in.
I'm sure he is. And speaking of Public Enemy, like 31 years ago, they released a song which was perhaps their biggest song, their biggest hit, "Fight the Power." It was on the soundtrack to the Spike Lee film "Do the Right Thing," one of my favorite sort of urban culture films, all about preceded the race riots in LA in the early 90s. Really good film. If you haven't seen it, definitely check it out. But they have re-released the song, not just as the original. They've remixed it, redone it, and they've brought on a number of guest talent as well. The likes of Nas, YG, Rhapsody, Black Thought, Questlove, and I believe it's Jahi. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that one right, because some of these artists aren't exactly...
They're not mainstream. They're probably not your mainstream ones, yeah.
Yeah, except for what? Nas? He's probably...
he's mainstream, yeah. But definitely the other ones. More of your...
but essentially it's inspired by the whole Black Lives Matter movement of 2020. So they've redone it, and they've got a new album on the way, from what I understand, which comes out on September the 25th.
Man, how old are these guys?
They'd be 50 or so.
I think in a previous episode we were talking about even like linking it to the Roger Federer thing. We're talking about how
60.
When do these rappers when should they retire, right? And same with Roger Federer. He's fourth in the world. He's 39 years old. Is he going to retire at the top, or is he going to wait till he's like ranked 50 or 100 before he's like, you know what, I don't want to play anymore, right?
It's a good question.
Same with these rappers. Like, these guys are old. Are they doing it for the money? They got nothing else to do. They just want to hang out with their mates. I'm sure there's a few reasons as to why they're coming back.
I think there's a number of reasons. I mean, Chuck D, singer of Public Enemy, he's 60 years old. I thought he was 50, so he's 60.
Yeah.
Flavor Flav, his clock-wearing companion, he is...
But just because they're old doesn't mean like, they can't
61.
rap. It's just a question of when do you say, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to retire. And
I think that comes down to your motivations. Like, these people are creatives, right? So, they're artists. And, as personally someone who likes to write a lot and just build stuff, like that for me is a source of energy. It's a source of, it just keeps me going in a way. It's like nourishment. And if you're not getting that in your life, then that's perhaps when these guys turn to less wholesome pursuits and drugs and all sorts of other stuff. So, they don't necessarily need to be at the top of the Billboard charts, but continuing to do something, I think, is perhaps something they need to do. But the question then becomes, how important is your legacy to you? Because I've seen like bands like Kiss. So I grew up massive Kiss fan. their best days were obviously in the 70s. They released some albums that I personally love in the 80s. They came back for a reunion tour in 96, 97, put the makeup back on, let a whole new generation of people see him. And since then, they've spent another 20 years basically not really creating much new music, just touring, playing the same old songs, and they've become a bit of a sideshow. And to me, I feel like the legacy has somewhat been diminished. They become a bit of a joke when if they just let it go at 1997 after that reunion tour, have one last hurrah, people would have looked back. I remember that band Kiss. That was so but now it's just like done to death.
Well, that's exactly I agree with you. And if are they maybe, who knows? Like I'm sure a big part of it is money. I'm sure they're making
tons.
They're
still
tours, right?
selling out stadiums and stuff.
Yeah, and they probably obviously enjoy it and stuff. But then if you look back at the legacy, is that going to tarnish it? Maybe a little bit. And
maybe not.
Yeah, but even with like that Roger Federer example, if he retires now, in the top 5 still, and he's been the top, few players in the world for the last 20 years. If he retires now, he's retiring at the top, right? But if he falls away and he's ranked 100 and then he retires, I reckon that's going to just slightly tarnish his reputation, even though he's still going to be, and he'll still go down as probably the best player ever. He's still, I think if he retired at the top still at 39 years old, 40 years old, I reckon that's going to be even better for his legacy.
Yeah, maybe. I think it might be. It all could be just a matter of short-termism too. Like,
What do you remember, right?
I think if enough time passes, all you remember is them being this amazing champion, rather than the last year or two of their career when they kind of started losing. And I think Muhammad Ali is an example of this. So I'm just bringing up his professional boxing career. Like from what I understand, towards the end of his career, he was basically losing a number of fights. There's a ton of references I've got to get through here. Okay, television appearances. That's not what I'm after. Hopefully, we'll be able to find something. But he essentially, all right, I'm not finding something. Anyway, Muhammad Ali, he lost his last fight. I know that much. And people don't talk about that. They talk about his fights over Joe Frazier, over George Foreman, the ones that he won. Was it the first round, he knocked out Sonny Liston. That's what they talk about. They don't talk about the losses towards the end of his career. Yeah. Same as Michael Jordan. Look, the Last Dance documentary basically glorified Michael Jordan as like the greatest of all time, which in many respects he is. I think he is based on my understanding of the game. But, his last few years, he was at Washington. He wasn't exactly winning championships.
No one cares about that. You're right.
Exactly. People forget about
it. It wasn't even in the documentary, right? As in, I'm pretty sure they just cut that bit out. It was just pretty much obviously just focused on the Bulls.
Exactly.
I think another layer of that is, what is their motivation and like, are they striving for some sort of success? So if you look at Roger Federer, for example, he's won all these titles, all these Grand Slams, whatever. I don't think there's much left for him to do. Whereas when you look at NBA players like sports teams, right? So if you look at an NBA player who might have been a superstar for a huge chunk of their career, is entering their maybe late 30s, a lot of them get to the point where they still want to play because they want to win a championship if they haven't won one before. So that's kind of their motivation. So they're happy to come off the bench rather than be a starter because they've got the chance to win a championship with a team that's got a chance of winning one. So I think that probably obviously plays a big part in it when it comes to sport. That's why with Federer, I don't know, maybe he's still chasing something. Maybe it's like if he gets another Grand Slam or two, he's going to be even better than what people see him as now. But the NBA thing, I think you see a lot of stars that take that sixth man role or they come off the bench, which is a huge ego hit, but a lot of them do it because they're looking for that championship.
Yeah, 100%. And I finally managed to bring up the boxing record of Muhammad Ali. So he did indeed lose 3 of his last 4 fights. No one talks about that though, right? So they talk about all these wins, all of the green on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. That's what they talk about. I mean, he won his first 31 fights before losing to Joe Frazier. Like that's insane. 31-0 win streak. In a sport that's not exactly easy on the body. And then he came back to beat Joe Frazier as well twice. So winning that trilogy 2-1. So champion. And just on the topic of people who don't know when to give up, I think in the world of music, in the world of rock and roll, Lemmy Killmeister, who was the founder, singer, chief lyricist, writer for the band Motorhead. This guy passed away about 5 years ago at the age of 70 years old. And he kept rocking. He was basically the epitome of the rock star. But, I saw them on stage a couple of years before he passed away. And his whole thing was, look, I want to die on stage. And he just kept playing. And that in many ways has elevated his legacy. Like since he passed away, like his funeral was attended by thousands of people. Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters basically gave the eulogy. And now you see people with like Lemmy t-shirts. And I was at this bar on the Sunset Strip in LA, the Rainbow Bar and Grill, which is like an iconic rock and roll bar. And they've renamed it to Lemmy's Bar. So sometimes just sticking around until the day you die can have the opposite effect on your legacy and just elevate it even more.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good point. I think, there's different ways to look at it. You're not going to probably know, obviously you're not going to know how it's going to impact things until, after you're gone, the next generation coming through. But, it's a fascinating one. Any other big news, Steve? What's going on? What do you have there?
There's a whole bunch going on, man. We could talk about the royal family and Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, now signing a contract with Netflix. Now, that's not something that I tend to delve into myself, but we can skip that one. Skip that one. Let's talk about Joe Rogan making his Spotify debut this week. So, of course, he signed that $100 million, I believe it was a 3-year deal, a licensing deal. So they haven't even bought his show. They've just licensed it for 3 years. But when it went live about a week ago, it seemed that there were some notable podcast episodes missing. So Alex Jones being one, another one being David Seaman, the conspiracy theorist, unfortunate surname, far-right personalities like Owen Benjamin.
Wasn't there an English goalkeeper?
David Seaman.
David Seaman as well. Yeah, there you go.
The only best thing I remember about David Seaman was when Macedonia played England and we scored a goal against him from a corner kick. And we ended up drawing. So we'd always draw against England, but then we'd lose to like Andorra 4-0 or something. Terrible.
We digress. But
speaking of underestimating lower performing opponents and underestimating better ones, in this case, or the other way around. Nonetheless, so so all these episodes with far-right personalities who are perhaps a little bit controversial, have been missing from the platform, which he basically said, "Look, guys, don't worry, I'm moving to Spotify. It's still my show. They're not going to change anything." So now there's a lot of conjecture around, well, why are the episodes missing? Like, does this mean that Spotify is going to censor Joe Rogan going forward? Are they going to have to approve which episodes go live? Like, it's still, from what I understand, is an unresolved question.
I'm sure he's the kind of guy that probably would never let that happen. I'm sure he wants to get them all out. But I think what's the actual arrangement? So if I obviously want to listen to Joe Rogan now, are you telling me that all the episodes from now onwards I have to get through Spotify? So I need to be a subscriber to Spotify, or is it everything in the catalog?
So as of a week ago, the 1st of September is when Joe Rogan, his content debuted on Spotify. Previously, it wasn't available there.
Yep.
Now, as of December 31, it will be exclusive to Spotify. Whereas now it's still on YouTube, it's still on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, everywhere else, but it will be exclusive to Spotify. So that's part of their strategy to effectively capture more eardrums in the case of podcasts, but also to become the go-to platform for podcasts. Like, they want to own that space. And whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing for podcasters remains to be seen. Monopolization tends not to be good in general, but
I was because obviously he sold for what, $100 million. I was reading somewhere that for Spotify to make their money back, he needs to bring over about 1.5 or 1.7 million subscribers to Spotify, which I'm pretty sure he'll do over time. I don't think I actually think
Yeah, it's easy.
It's very easy for him to do. So I think they'll probably make their money back pretty quick.
Yeah. Well, I think if you look at Joe Rogan's monthly listeners, he gets
it's
about 190 million monthly
Yeah.
downloads, right? So if he's publishing,
fraction of that comes over to
Yeah.
Spotify.
yeah. So I mean, that could be 4 or 5 episodes a month. So it still translates to tens of millions of subscribers already, and you just need a
I
fraction.
think it's a pretty good deal for Spotify. I
Yeah.
think they'll do pretty well out of it.
Just to close the loop on the whole censorship thing, Alex Jones, one of the controversial far right personalities, basically said this about it, saying Joe Rogan's favorite 100 episodes of the last 10 years or so will be left on YouTube starting December 31 until December 31 when he goes exclusively to Spotify. For these couple of months, No Man's Land content will be on both platforms and will be migrating over. So Alex Jones seems to think that there's some sort of arrangement between Joe Rogan and Spotify where Joe keeps certain episodes on YouTube to continue monetizing them there until coming over exclusively. But that is still an unknown question or answer as to whether or not that's exactly what's happening here. But moving on from Joe Rogan back to the world of sports and entertainment, NBA 2K21. Have you got yourself a copy of any of the NBA 2Ks yet? We talked about NBA Live last week.
Yeah. No, like I said, I've probably got every version of my, like, the last console I had before I had the Switch is PS4. So I probably got everything up until 2K19, I'd say, or 18. But I haven't got the recent ones. But I might look into this one. Depends on what the reviews are like, because people are pretty ruthless these days on these sporting games. We talked about the one last week. I think it was Madden, right, where they haven't really innovated over the last five years or so. It's pretty much the same game every year. So I'll probably do a little bit of searching, see what the reviews are like. And
the reviews aren't very positive. TechRadar gave it 3.5 out of 5, and Steam has given it 5 out of 10. Forbes did a review, the good, the bad, and the bottom line. And apparently there's been all sorts of issues. For example, people ordering the Dame version despite paying for the Mamba Forever version. There's a few bugs in the platform and whatnot. One person tweeted, "First day of NBA 2K21 and I've come to the conclusion it is the worst 2K I've ever played." Whereas another person said, "I ain't gonna lie, I'm loving NBA 2K21." So, you know what? I think you're right. People have such high expectations nowadays when it comes to almost anything that it's a bit of a entitlement thing. It's like, oh, there's this little bug over here. Meanwhile, the game is
expectations, right?
Meanwhile, the game's insane. Like, you've got career mode. You can follow players around off court, off season. You can literally follow them like going to a restaurant and them being pestered by people out on the street.
It depends on the kind of person you get as well. So for me, when I buy these games, I don't play the my career mode. I don't like do a full season.
No.
I just play like the exhibition games, right? It's like one-on-one, play with a friend or whatever, right? And for me, that's enough. And I'm pretty sure this kind of game, I'm sure this one will be absolutely fine for that purpose. I think the people that are complaining are the ones that literally spend days, weeks, months on end playing the my career mode and want to see, I guess, some improvement in that space.
Well, that's the thing, right? And I think it comes back to being intentional about how you spend your time. Because I know I'm the same. I play exhibition. It's about 30 minutes to get through a game, and that's it. Whereas if I commit to a season and I get hooked, then I could find myself investing 10, 15 hours a week, if not more, into something which really isn't going to serve me that much long term. Let's be honest.
That's it.
I think it's just a good way to get into flow for 20 or 30 minutes, particularly now while we're in lockdown. There aren't too many activities that can help you get to that space. So other than that, to me, all these additional features they're rolling out, kind of like whatever, doesn't really bother me. I could play NBA 2K15 right now. And
me too. I actually might prefer that, to be honest. It's a bit less realistic, so I've probably got a better chance of winning.
Definitely. So one last thing to wrap up with. We've obviously been working remotely now for about 7 months. And this is no doubt going to play out in a decrease in demand for commercial office space and real estate around the world. But that could be a good thing for companies. So, we're a small team here at No Filter Media, but if you are a team of, say, 100 people, the average annual office space rental in New York is $14,000 per employee. So if you have 100 people, that's $1.4 million you could be saving USD, about 2 million Aussie per year. Now the question is, what do you do with that money? And we've got this article on our website, which I happen to write, called 6 Ways to Reinvest Office Space Savings into Your People. And I think it's worthwhile organizations actually transfer some of those office perks back to people's home offices. So invest in that home office equipment, send out some care packages, pay for those gym memberships, give people a budget to attend local meetups once their economy opens up, and maybe give them access to a co-working space if they want to get out of the house and work somewhere else and mingle with some people. I mean, what do you think about organizations reinvesting some of the savings back into their people?
I think when it comes to these office leases, a lot of them are probably signed up for a few years. So it's not like they're probably getting that benefit now. But what I've seen from just talking to friends and some other organizations is that I think the one thing the companies are probably doing now, more companies than not, is providing a little bit of budget for people to set up that office space at home, whether it be, here's $200, $500, use it however you want to set up a nice place in your bedroom, in your study. So you kind of, I think it comes down to OH&S as well, right? Like they want to make sure people aren't, hurting their backs at home, being in uncomfortable positions. They've got screens at eye level and things like that. So that's probably the one thing that more of them are doing now. But those other things you mentioned, like the co-working thing, gym memberships, I don't think that's being done as much right now. But it probably over time, I think once people realize that, hey,
and
we're probably not going to need our office as much. We're going to have to pass on some of those funds to employees.
Okay, we lost you for a second there, so I was interjecting for a second, but I caught the end of it. Definitely passing some of those savings on to employees, I think, is a good thing. Oftentimes these perks have been designed to keep people in the office, like on-site yoga, on-site masseuses, on-site food and drinks, but ultimately let's make people's lives away from the office better, and that's something that their families, housemates, friends, lovers, whatever, can all benefit from. To wrap things up, I guess just worth noting that we have a new podcast kicking off later this week, and that is Mick Wall's Get Your Rocks Off. And Mick Wall, being one of the world's most decorated music and rock and roll journalists, is kicking off a 12-episode season where he'll be unpacking stories from his 45 years in the world of rock and roll. Listeners can subscribe to that over at nofilter.media/Get Your Rocks Off. Our Battle of the Bands Season 1, Megadeth versus Metallica, will also be coming to a close. The season finale is this Friday morning. That's Friday the 11th of September. And we have a few big names coming to the Alley Oop Show. I think next week we have a big NBA analyst from the Bleacher Report joining us.
Yeah, Rick Bucher will be joining us. They'll be having a chat this week. And a couple of more guests over the next few weeks that I think, the audience and the fans will really enjoy.
Fantastic. Well, people can learn all about that over at nofilter.media. You can find all of our podcasts, articles, videos, you name it, over at nofilter.media. Until next time, stay safe.
Awesome. See you, Steve.